Good evening and welcome. My name is Nicholas and I help direct the events here at the Strand bookstore. For a bit of history, the Strand was actually founded in 1927 by the Bass family over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled until after over 91 years, we are the sole survivor of that conglomerate of bookstores, still run by the Bass family and still housing new and used books. Tonight we are so excited to host award-winning poet and author Ocean Vuong. Ocean is the author of the critically acclaimed poetry collection Night Sky with Exit Wounds, which won the Whiting Award and the T.S. Eliot Prize. His writings have also been featured in The Atlantic, Harper's, The Nation, New Republic, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. Ocean's foray into fiction comes in the form of his first novel, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. At least some of us are. And we couldn't be more honored to host its launch. Ocean will be joined in conversation by Jacqueline Woodson, award-winning author of several books, including Miracle Boys, Brown Girl Dreaming, After Tupac and Dee Foster, Feathers, and Show Way. Her upcoming novel, Red at the Bone, is set to release in September from Penguin Random House. She was named the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature by the Library of Congress for 2018 to 2019. So without further ado, please give a huge welcome to Ocean, Jacqueline, and On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous to the Strand.
Hello, everyone. Just inviting patron Saint James Baldwin to join us. Thank you so much for being here and for your presence and for showing up and being here for books. It's a great pleasure of mine to join Jacqueline Woodson, a hero of mine, tonight, and to read from this book. I was trained as a poet first, and I was always told as a poet that you should never expect anybody to wait for you at the end of what you're writing. And I think it's good advice. You know, it's always a privilege to have an audience. And so to know that there are folks standing here for this book, that great privilege is not lost on me. And I'd like to say thank you deeply for being here and for supporting it. Thank you.
So I am so proud to be in conversation with Ocean, whose work I have long admired. I mean, as I've been reading it. And we're going to start tonight with Ocean reading from On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. Can I just get a show of hands? The book dropped yesterday, so happy book birthday to Ocean. Has anyone read it yet? Has anyone finished it? Okay, y'all need to go back and read it again because it just came out yesterday. And I know you didn't read it that fast because it took my Ocean a long time to write it, so just give it one more read. So we're going to start with Ocean reading to you from it.
Thank you. Thank you. So a lot of this book is centered around the first person narrative. And one thing with the first person is that the I can very easily become a black hole. It becomes all about me, myself, and I. And I knew that with such a gaze comes great power and responsibility. And I wanted to turn the I into a searchlight so that it could cast itself outward, so that the speaker, when looking upon, in this case, the women who raised him, you get a sense of who he is through how he looks at the world rather than how he presents himself to the reader. And in this scenario, he's navigating his life and his upbringing by these two women, his mother and grandmother, who suffer from mental illness, having experienced the war in Vietnam and its after effects. So we'll be dropped in to one of these episodes. I'm dragged into a hole, darker than the night around it, by two women. Only when one of them screams do I know who I am. I see their heads, black hair matted from the floor they sleep on. The air sharp with a chemical delirium as they jostle in the blur of the car's interior. Eyes still thick with sleep, I make out the shapes. A headrest, a felt monkey the size of a thumb swinging from the rear view. A piece of metal shining, then gone. The car peels out of the driveway, and I can tell from the smell of acetone and nail polish that it's your tan and rust Toyota. You and Grandma Lan are in the front, clamoring for something that won't show itself. The street lights fling by, hitting your faces with the force of blows. He's gonna kill her, Ma. He's gonna do it this time, you say, breathless. We riding, helicopter fast, Lan says. She's in her own mind, red and dense with obsession. We riding where? She clutches the flip-down mirror with both hands. I can tell by her voice that she is smiling, or at least gritting her teeth. He's gonna kill my sister, Mama. You sound like you're flailing down a river. I know, Carl, it's for real this time. You hear me? Ma. Lan rocks side to side from the mirror, making whooshing sounds. We getting out of here, huh? We gotta go far, little dog. Outside, the night surges by like sideways gravity. The green numbers on the dash read 3:04 a.m. Who put my hands in my face? The tires squeal at each turn. The streets are empty and it feels like a whole universe in here. In everything, hurling through the cosmic dark, while in the front seat, the women who raised me are losing their minds. Through my fingers, the night is black construction paper. Only the frazzled heads of these two before me are clear, swaying. Don't worry, Mai. You're speaking to yourself now. Your face so close to the windshield, the glass fogs a ring that spreads in equal measure to your words. I'm coming. We're coming. After a while, we swerve down a street lined with Continentals. The car crawls, then stops in front of a gray clapboard townhouse. Mai, you say, pulling the emergency brake. He's gonna kill Mai. Lan, who all this time had been shaking her head from side to side, stops, as if the words have finally touched a little button inside her. What? Who killed who? Who died this time? Both of you stay in the car, you say. You unbuckle your belt, leap out, and shuffle toward the house, the door left open behind you. There's a story Lan would tell of Lady Chiu, the mythical woman warrior who led an army of men and repelled the Chinese invasion of ancient Vietnam. I think of her seeing you, how, as legend goes, armed with two swords, she'd fling her yard-long breasts over her shoulders and cut down the invaders by the dozens. How it was always a woman who saved us. Who died now? Lan swings around. Her face, made stark by the overhead light, ripples with this new knowledge. Who gonna die, little dog? She flips her hand back and forth, as if opening a locked door to indicate emptiness. Somebody kill you? For what? But I'm not listening. I'm rolling down the window, arms burning with each turn. Cool November air, My stomach grabs as I watch you mount the front steps, the 9-inch machete glinting in your hand. You knock on the door, shouting. Come out, Carl, you say in Vietnamese. Come out, you fucker. I'm taking her home for good. You can have the car, just give me my sister. At the word sister, your voice cracks into a short, busted sob before regaining control. You bash the door with the machete's wooden butt. The porch lights turn on, your pink nightgown suddenly green under the fluorescent. The door opens. You step back. A man appears. He half lunges from the doorway as you backpedal down the steps, the blade locked at your side as if pinned in place. He has a gun, Lon Whisper shouts from the car, now lucid. Rose, it's a shotgun. It shoots 2 eaters at once. They eat your lungs inside out. Little dog, tell her. Your hands float over your head. The metal clanks on the driveway. The man, huge, his shoulders sloped under a gray Yankee sweatshirt, steps up to you, says a few words through his teeth, then kicks the machete to the side. It disappears in the grass with a flash. You mumble something, make yourself small, cup your hands under your chin, the posture you take after receiving a tip at the nail salon. The man lowers his gun as you back away, shaking toward the car. It's not worth it, Rose, Lon says, cupping her mouth with both hands. You can't beat a gun. You just can't. Come back. Come back in the helicopter. Ma, I hear myself say, my voice cracking. Ma, come on. You edge slowly into the driver's seat, turn to me with a nauseated stare. There's a long silence. I think you're about to laugh, but then your eyes fill, so I turn away to the man carefully eyeing us, hand on his hip, the gun clamped between his armpit, pointed at the ground, protecting his family. When you start to talk, your voice is scraped out. I catch only parts of it. It's not Mai's house, you explain, fumbling with your keys. Or rather, Mai is no longer there. The boyfriend, Carl, who used to slam her head against the wall, is no longer there. This is somebody else, a white man with a shotgun and a bald head. It was a mistake, you're saying to Lon, an accident. But Mai has not lived here for 5 years, Lon says with sudden tenderness. Rose, although I don't see it, I can tell she's brushing your hair behind your ear. Mai moved to Florida, remember? To open her own salon. Lon is poised, her shoulders relaxed. Someone else has stepped inside her and started moving her limbs, her lips. We go home now. You need sleep, Rose. The engine starts. The car lurches into a U-turn. As we pull away from the porch, a boy no older than I am points a toy pistol at us. The gun jumps and his mouth makes blasting noises. His father turns to yell at him. He shoots once, 2 more times. From the window of my helicopter, I look at him. I look him dead in the eyes and do what you do. I refuse to die. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ocean. Thanks for reading that passage. Thanks for calling the ancestors back into the room with us. I know without them, neither of us would be here. And I wanted to start by asking you how you started writing poetry, how you discovered poetry even.
Yeah, thank you. Can y'all hear me with the air conditioner on? Is this a good volume? Okay. I started Well, I came to this city. It's really interesting reading here, because in a way, the Strand bookstore was the first place that I realized writers are alive. I didn't know that. I don't come from a reading culture in my neighborhood and my home, and I came here to study business at Pace University. And I wrote on the side in my journals. And it wasn't until I came to this bookstore, and when I first came here, y'all used to have the poetry all the way in the back. I remember that years ago. And the poetry was tucked away in the left-hand corner in the back. And I would get lost in those stacks, and at times it would be closed and I wouldn't know, and someone would find me later back there. So, you got to get out of here, But it was just roaming the city, going to business school, leaving, and then going to open mics and finding my voice in that way. And the open mic is the best education, I think, for a writer, because you get 3 minutes and you got to make it count. Every word has to count. The way you say it has to matter, and you have to have conviction for every intonation that you say. And that's also the oral tradition that I was raised on with these women. They can't read or write, but they were not without the imagination. And just because I'm the first to be able to read doesn't mean I'm the first poet and the first storyteller. And so I always felt that I lived in poetry before I knew it as a vocation. I knew it bodily. I recognized it. And in some ways, being raised by such women helped me write better, because when they sat down to tell their stories, these are stories that survived hundreds of years, and they are the stories that they've decided to carry across thousands of miles, thousands of conflicts with them. And so by the time they tell it to me, it's gone through hundreds of drafts. It's a masterclass of efficiency, suspense, rhetoric even. And that was every night. We didn't have TV or radio. That was every night. So I was learning at the feet of these women who used words which weigh nothing and cost nothing in order to give themselves power when they felt powerless in the American landscape.
So it's so true. Every time Lan opened her mouth, it was pure poetry in the book. And how did that work in terms of when I know this is a novel and you're talking about the women in your life. So when they were speaking in Vietnamese. And how did it work in terms of bringing it to the page so poetically in English the way you do in the novel?
Right. A lot of it was following, it's a work of collaboration and translation. And I realize I've always been doing that for them. I've always been an interpreter for my family. And when you do that work, you realize that you're also editing. You hear English in one ear, and out your mouth has to be Vietnamese in a way that is concise, understandable, comprehensible. And so within seconds, a child doing this work is editing and cleaning up the sentences as he hears it. And you start to embody these rhythms. And I borrowed a lot of rhythms of the American vernacular to give them voice in English. And I think I found a lot of commonalities between Southern Vietnam as a culture and the American South as a culture. There are strange and eerily similar parallels, including a civil war. Not only a civil war in both countries, but a civil war where the South was seen as more agrarian and in some ways less educated, and South Vietnam in a similar way. And with that comes this parallel organic growth of storytelling. The power of storytelling was much richer in South Vietnam. And I found myself recognizing my folks in the works of Southern writers like Flannery O'Connor and Truman Capote, and even Toni Morrison. I know she's from Missouri, but the imagination is very Southern Gothic to me, and I recognize that transformation. So when she had Beloved walk out of the water as a ghost, this moment of magical realism, it wasn't strange to me. I said, wait a minute, my grandmother could have told this story, you know. And the thing about Beloved, it is a slave narrative, and it's a narrative of post, you know, of war America. But when I read it, I also read it as a refugee narrative. Mm-hmm. This is someone escaping. And it was so empowering for me to be able to look at the women in my life and see them as the primary source, the first generation escaping a geopolitical rift, in the same way Toni Morrison's character preserved her child in one way. You can call that preservation, that incredible act that she did.
It's so interesting because I think you're absolutely right when you think about the trauma of the American South and the Black people who had to escape that trauma and come to the new world of the North for a better opportunity and for their lives, basically, because we were getting lynched and everything else that was happening there. And in terms of thinking about that, thinking about what gets passed down in terms of genetic memory and how that impacts our generation, even though we're generations removed from that. And I feel like in Unearthed, We're Briefly Gorgeous, you do talk about that a lot. And I wanted to ask you, how are you able to go back and get to that? And in writing it, was it a cathartic experience?
I've never felt writing was cathartic for me. It's satisfied in a way. I don't think we're ever released of our obsessions and the things that haunt us. And that's evidenced by why I decided to write a novel. You know, I wrote a book of poems that really had this life that I'm still following in a way. And Night Sky became what it was beyond any poet's imagination. And right away, my friends and colleagues and peers would say, well, you wrote about American violence in your poems and reckoning with history. Now what? As if a book finishes one's inquiry into one's history and one's surroundings. And I never felt that to be true. I never felt that 85 pages of paperback poems could possibly answer these questions that I had all my life as an American. And I think it comes out of this capitalistic anxiety. We want a fresh new product. We always want to reinvent ourselves. This culture is obsessed with the new, the redemption story. And I never felt like I wanted to reinvent my obsessions because I weren't done with them. And so the experiment was to turn these questions and press them into the architecture of a novel. And that's the thing that satisfies, is that by writing a novel, we can give an architecture where these ideas can live and think and be encountered by other folks. And we often use metaphors to think about books. And I think the best way to look at a novel is a town square. You're building a town square, and whoever comes in, they meet your characters, they meet you, and then they go home perfect as they are, and hopefully with a little extra.
Mm-hmm. So great. One thing we were talking about in the back is how, aside from the stunning writing in Unearthed, We're Briefly Gorgeous, is the hope that's woven through the narrative. And I found it to be such an amazingly hopeful book, and I wanted you to talk about that.
Yes, I never considered it a tragic story. I wanted to write a book that finds joy and delight without forsaking the trials and tribulations that these characters go through. And I felt that, in fact, the difficulties inform joy. That you understand why these characters laugh so easily. And because it becomes the merciful light in the midst of all this darkness. And it's hard to understand how necessary joy is without being honest with the pain that these characters go through. And I think we often talk about queer tragedies, you know, the tragic queer story. And I never felt that to be true, because when we frame it like that, we often look at queerness being innately faulty in itself. That it's the queerness that is the tragic, that is the queerness that makes these lives tragic. But in fact, it's hegemonic masculinity in this patriarchal structure that made these lives lose themselves within it. And so the tragedy is America. And I wanted to deflect or reflect that gaze and say, some folks don't survive in this book, but their destruction was not necessary for the realization of the protagonist. And that's how a lot of Western literature and the Western canon is given to us from the Greco-Roman tradition. David and Goliath, right? The protagonist earns his right in the world by conquest. And I wanted to write about American violence, but I did not want to enact American violence, because then it will only be a replication. I would just be another cog in the wheel. So I had to turn to other methods. And one of the methods I found, a narrative structure, was a Japanese form called Kisho Tenketsu. And it's actually a Chinese form that helped organize lineation in Chinese poetry. So ki is the introduction of a character or a scene. Sho is deepening those things. Teng is a turn, not a plot twist, but a turn, a different element. Sometimes a whole different character would be introduced. And ketsu is the accumulation of all of those things. It's not a summary, not a conclusion, but an accumulation. And so what happens is that it's a plot system that moves without conflict. And I always felt that proximity, life lived in proximity, has plenty of drama and tension, enough to build a narrative structure worthy of literature. And that's how we live. Like, we're not here because of a linear plot. We're here because of proximity. We decided to put our bodies amongst each other, alongside each other, and from that proximity, meaning is amplified and created. And in this way, I think writing as a poet is very akin to chemistry. You have hydrogen, perfect on its own, oxygen, necessary. You put them together, and it's water. And words have always lived this way for me. And so when I thought about the vignette, which is a lot of this book is written in vignettes, I realized that I didn't have to bridge a lot of the scenes together. They can stand in proximity, and they can live like chemicals in the way Kisho Tenketsu has taught me, in the work of Hideaki Miyazaki and a lot of Studio Ghibli, and a lot of Japanese narrative forms, including Basho and The Narrow Road to the Deep North. Wow. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I feel like we can end right there and then go home and get back to our novel. So thank you for that. Wow.
Thank you.
So we wanted to take, I feel like I can just talk to you all night, but I don't want to be selfish. So we're going to take some questions from the audience.
Perfect.
And do you have any parameters around what people can ask?
No, go. This is all open.
There's one up front here.
All right, I got a microphone, so wait until I pass it to you if you don't mind.
And if you could just tell us your name when you ask the question.
Hi, my name is Maya, and And I was just wondering how you approached voice, because you've been writing poetry, and then this novel feels so intimate and so close. You spoke about the eye as a black hole, so just how did you kind of navigate that in terms of voice?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Voice. I knew early that, a poem is for me, the lyric poem is a whittling down. You get sharper and sharper. You're carving the space, and as soon as you start the poem, the everything closes. You go towards a pinnacle, the edge of a blade. And a novel is expansive. In a way, it's haunting. And one of the great opportunities of the novel as a form is that it becomes kind of an ark, A-R-K, as in Noah's Ark. And I think that allegory really informed me. When I got to Hartford, my family and I grew up in a black community. And I would go to church. I would go to Baptist church with my friends. Mostly because they had ice cream after. Ice cream sandwiches, So why not? But when I was listening to the pastor, and I remember the first time I heard about Noah's Ark, I just thought, I was so fascinated by it. I thought he was real, because if you're a kid, every story is real. And I think I carried that with me, that mythology with me as an artist. And it's how I wrote all my books. And the novel is just an amplification of that. Think about it. The question then is, what do you do when you have to take everything you love, put it into a vessel for the future, after everything you see here is obliterated? Those are high stakes. But I think when we allow ourselves that dream and that ambition in the form and the craft, a lot of extraordinary things can happen. And so I saw the book as me loading the ark, taking everything I cared for and loved. And voice and voices are one of them. And I think a lot of it is also informed by queer theory, where I don't want to choose one voice. I want a plurality, a chorus. And so the poem or the book oscillates between many vernaculars. At times, there's a Joan Didion-like essayistic, incisive explorations. And other times, there's the vernacular of New England dialect, where we drop some of the G's. And I wanted to encompass all of it. And I think because I was reading, out of all things, Moby Dick and Herman Melville. And I felt, my goodness, here's an American writer, and I can understand why he became the pillar of American novel. Because here's a man who decided not to compromise anything. He built his own ark. 20 pages on how to harvest spermaceti, so be it. 20 pages on comparing the different sketches of the humpback whale, so be it. Theological explorations on whiteness as it relates to the whale and race, so be it. He said no to nearly nothing. And I thought, what would happen for a queer Asian American writer when he decided not to compromise? What would happen when we allowed the ultimate yes to everything that was going into our ark? And this book was my way of writing without the shackles that I felt was put on me as a writer of color. Yeah.
Michael Klein.
You do it. Ocean. Oh, my name is Michael. God, I have so much to say to you. But since you brought it up when you were talking about the different vernaculars, one of the most moving passages of this book was Trevor, the writing about Trevor, which was in a very different vernacular. It was more lyrical in a lot of ways. I wouldn't say poetic, but the thing that fascinated me, and I would love it if you could find a way to talk about it, was the way you wrote about sex. I have never read anything like it. I was astonished because it kept going back and forth between intimate, objective, diagnostic. It just had this wheel of, and the actual physical sex itself. I mean, the idea of not fucking but not fucking. You have a better way of saying it, but it's, you know what I'm talking about, right? And the holding of the, and not completing, but completing, and the completion is this sort of reckoning and destruction. I mean, it was fantastic, and I want to know how you did that.
Thank you, Michael. You're gonna make me blush here. But in all seriousness, I think I knew right away that sex and further desire was going to be a large factor of the book. And when I started to embark on being a novelist, I read the craft books, and they told me that I need conflict, I need destruction, I need the plot to move along, I need plot points. And one of the ways sex is treated and desire is treated in a lot of novels is as a plot point. Either we orchestrate people who want to possess each other, or they fall in love and they possess each other in order to do X, Y, Z. They propel the story forward. They were thresholds. And I think as a queer person, often we feel desire that society and our family tell us that we shouldn't feel. And you can walk by that person. You could pass them on the street or at a reading, and you would never know. You would think they're just sitting there. But when that person looks at something that they want and they're not supposed to want, there's a whole hurricane of feeling inside them. And I think I wanted to turn desire and sex not as a plot point, but a climate, to turn that into a weather. And part of that is a refusal to move on. Often in sex, particularly in coming of age novels, when you achieve it, it's the next step. It's a moment prerequisite to something else. But queer folks, we very rarely have modes. We never have instruction manuals. We don't have the talk, from our parents about the birds and the bees. And so a lot of our way towards desire is also a way towards self-knowledge, both on a psychological level, but on an anatomical level. We learn on the fly. And I wanted to have and honor that tradition of learning through failure. Because I think in this country, we shame failure. When people fail, we cast them aside. But for queer folks, failure becomes a necessary praxis towards success. So we fail forward. And I think I wanted the book to keep returning to failure until it triumphs in the sight of its fumbling, which is what being queer feels like to me.
Hi, thank you, Ocean. My name is Jasmine, and I have a question about reckoning with using personal experience, personal memories about people still alive, and how you, as a poet, a novelist, stay true to your own memories and what might have changed from your memories as a young person, and reckoning with, sorry, my words are failing me right now, reckoning with honoring those people you care about who are complex, complicated people, but who have also harmed others and been harmed, and how you decide what to share and what not to share, and what do you say is semi-autobiographical, or how do you decide what to include and what not to include?
Wonderful. That's a great question. I would say that for me, why I decided not to write a memoir and why the book is really not a memoir, it invites an autobiographical reading. That's very important and purposeful on my part. I could have I could have taken the same story and put it on Mars, and it would be distant from me, and it will still be the same story. I could put it in a different world, a different time. But it was important for me to invite that gaze and ultimately reject it, because that was one way of preserving my agency as an artist. I'm not a journalist, I'm not a historian. I respect that work too much to claim that space. I'm an inventor. And I think memoir, the goal of memoir is to arrive at truth, historical truth. And the novel, for me, begins with truth and is realized by the imagination. Because when I invent, I feel most free. I feel like I have the world at my hands. And that's very precious to me as a maker, a creator. And it's a magical act to take your life and then to make from it something that no one has lived, to make something of it that never existed, to turn what you had into something that is, in a way, a potential, a futurity. So no one has lived exactly in the ways I described in this book. It is the foundation of truth realized by art. And that was important to me. And it's steeped in the American tradition, again, back to Herman Melville. People don't realize that's an autobiographical novel. Herman lived that life. But we rarely speak of it that way. We see it simply as the monolith that is the great American novel. And I think race has to do with that. Writers of color are often pigeonholed into being conduits of an anthropological reality. In other words, we are seen as tour guides to pre-made worlds rather than world makers ourselves. And so my negotiation with this novel comes with that understanding of a writer of color in the American lineage would be expected and demanded to merely be a bridge. Folks walk over to see whatever dark, smoldering thing on the other side. And I wanted to refuse that by saying, who knows what's real or what's not? Ultimately, everything is made up because the dialogues are made up. It's impossible to record all that. The characters are all composites, and the whole world is a world that I've carried and created based on truth. That's important. That's why I didn't do the Mars route, because I wanted to say that these lives, poor, yellow, brown folks in Hartford, Connecticut, are inspiring to me. In the same way the white aristocracy was inspiring to Tolstoy and Turgenev and Proust. These lives were worthy to me of literature with a capital L. Maybe two more questions?
All right, we got one over here.
Hi, my name's Min. So when I first heard of Unearthed Were Briefly Gorgeous, I didn't know what to call it, I think. So it is a novel that is reframed as a letter at the beginning, and this letter, and it's also named after one of the pieces of your poetry. And not only that, but the letter at the beginning is something that you've posted a version of in The New Yorker. And I'm wondering, for you, in blurring these lines in terms of form, is genre something ephemeral for you, like an aesthetic tool, or is it something that should be completely obliterated?
For me, it was conscious. Like I said, the book starts with an essay that was in The New Yorker, notoriously fact-checked by New Yorkers. So you know that's the truth. That's the documented truth. And it was important for me to act out that that project, that thesis, that you will enter the book with total nonfiction and leave the book as a novel. And that felt important to me. And it also felt familiar to me as a poet. You know, there's a poem in Night Sky where I depict my parents' immigration to America as a wedding cake couple in a wine bottle. You know, of course, that's impossible. But I think mythologizing was always part of my imagination. So that truth was the starting point. It's the launching pad. And the imagination does the rest. And that's why I started in that way. But genres and the hybridity of genres and the queering of genres, to me, genres can be as fluid as genders. And that experimentation can happen right on the page. We don't have to decide who we are or what we are before we enter the project. I follow the sentence first and foremost. And at the end of the day, I'm an apprentice of the sentence. Thank you. One more question.
Any final question? Oh, in the back. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Eva. Can you hear me? Okay. I had a question about what you felt like the transition from poetry to a novel was. Did you feel like it was kind of a natural transition for you because your novel writing still has traces of poetry in it?
Both. In a lot of ways, it was challenging because it's a whole new world. And in a lot of ways, I learned that poetry actually helped me in ways that it might not have helped other novelists. And I had great ancestors. You know, Annie Dillard works in both forms, Anne Carson, Teresa Hak-Kyung Cha, Maggie Nelson, Claudia Rankine, Marguerite Duras. All of these folks blended the form and worked in both genres. The biggest challenge was writing the serviceable mundane. He opened the door. I'll tell you, as a poet, it was so hard to leave that on the page. You know, because that's what we cut out. And in a way, writing poetry is like making bouillon cubes. And I had to learn how to add the water and live with it. But I learned that you can, you know, those serviceable, bland phrases are actually amplifiers. They're the recess that amplifies everything else, like a bas relief. And when I got over that hump, I realized that I could do this. And a lot of it was just looking at Joan Didion's work again carefully and seeing how she uses both moments of the lyrical, specific flourishes in the midst of hard-boiled journalistic language. That was incredibly helpful for me and gave me a lot of permission. Yeah.
Thank you, Ocean. So I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank you, Ocean, for your lovely language, for making us remember Vietnam. I think ours is a country that is constantly trying to forget history, and you woke us up again. And I want to thank you for your language, your presence, your graciousness. I think you're such a generous spirit, and it's been so great to talk to you. Thanks, everyone. So Ocean will be signing books,
yes,
right?
and I just want to say thank you to Jackie Woodson. You're Another Brooklyn, a fabulous book, was one of the stars in helping me navigate this book. When I saw what you did in that book, how you allowed space between the life, it gave me so much permission and so much faith in the reader that silence is not deaf, which is often what we're told in this country.
Mm-hmm.
If you're silent, if you're still, then you're nothing. You're weak.
Mm-hmm.
You're deaf,
Mm-hmm.
or you're lazy. You're not. Your stasis is laziness. But when you had those breaks and those emptiness, those moments of pause in between your paragraphs, it was full of the ramifications of the language, and the reader participates in the white space with you. And that book was a masterclass for me, as is all of your work. And
Thank
I'm really,
you.
really grateful to be with an elder and a hero of mine in this space to celebrate this book. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jacqueline, Ocean, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I think I speak for everyone when I say that. So, as said before, we're going to go by rows. So, if the first 2 rows wouldn't mind standing up and lining up on